LinkedIn, hello. Happy New Year, everyone. This is super exciting. First LinkedIn Live 2025. We're kicking it off with an amazing panel talking about all of the small shops, many hats. And this was when I started to talk about what we're doing in the new year, what we were talking about. And I can thank Karis here for the original suggestion about this topic. It just struck a nerve and it was all over LinkedIn. Anytime I said small shop, many hats, everyone knew what I was talking about. And so this is really exciting. We put together an amazing panel of Hive members, and there's some people saying hello already in the comments. Hi, Debbie. We're really excited you're here to join us, and our lovely panelists have said yes to taking questions throughout. So if you have comments or questions you want to throw in, that'd be great. I'm going to start by having everybody here do a quick introduction and their background as a many hats executive director. So Karis, why don't you kick it off for us here?
Hi, everybody. My name's Karis, and I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit here called Evermore Gather Grow Lead, and we do recreational programming for children and youth in the west central area of Winnipeg. I've been working in the nonprofit sector. I guess I'll be starting my 25th year in March, as well as my 25th year with the organization, and I've been the executive director for 9 years. So I've had the privilege of being, with the same organization for the whole time, and to play all sorts of different roles. So thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
That's awesome. Swati, can you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me. My name is Swati Nigam. I am based in Austin, Texas, and I am the executive director for a nonprofit called American Friends of Helpage India. We are the fundraising arm of a nonprofit based in India, which is called Helpage India, which has been working in India for almost 50 years. But in the US, we are just 3-4 years old. And I've been in the sector for almost 10 years now, and with a lot of gray hairs added in those 10 years. And I've had the fortune of working with different organizations through the years and meeting so many people. So I'm very excited to be part of this panel and talking about this topic, which is so close to all of our hearts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Anna, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Anna Taylor. I'm the executive director of the Greater Sum Foundation. We're an operating foundation, and we do capacity building programs for early stage nonprofits, most of whom are those small shops that we're talking about. So I both have that experience myself and also work with people having that experience day to day. And before I came to Greater Sum, I had a close to 20-year career with one organization wearing all the hats in succession. And it was an interesting first day at Greater Sum when I was like, oh, I get them all at once. Okay.
Absolutely. And I think that's just such a common experience, right? In this sector, most nonprofits are very small. So when we often hear about nonprofit, we're hearing about these big hospital foundations or international development aid. And I think that's what the perception is to people outside the sector of what nonprofit is. But this is a lot of nonprofit. So I'm super excited for this conversation. Got lots of our Hive members in the comments already. Hello, everyone. Super excited. So we're going to kick this off just quick. I threw this together last minute because, my energy level was high starting the new year. So let's try this out. If people have their phones or they'd like to try slido.com, we've got this cool app. It's completely anonymous. So you get to say what you'd like to say without having to reveal, too much information about yourself if you'd prefer, or you can scan the QR code. But you get to say a word that comes to mind for you as a practitioner. So maybe my panelists can do it as well, but I want to hear what you think of. Is it words of stress? Is it words of creativity? Is it, what comes to mind when you hear that word, many hats of nonprofit? That's a term we use a lot. And I don't know, what people would have to say about that, but it exists there. So we'll see if anybody decides to play with our Slido poll. I'll leave it up for another minute, but we can keep bringing in the comments and we'll move to the next question. Oh, there's Stacy and Sarah. Overwhelmed. Well, that one I was thinking would come out burnout. Community. I love that for many hats of nonprofit. I think we'd all agree that a lot of these smaller nonprofits tend to need community in order to do that many hats role. Tired. Interesting. I like this magician one someone's thrown in. That one's great, guys.
Flexibility, cool. That's a good one.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Overwhelmed. Yeah, that's the big one. So that's great. Thanks, everybody. You can keep on throwing words in. I'll pull up the banner maybe again in a minute, but we're going to jump right in. And Karis, can you kick us off? We're going to talk about, how do you personally prioritize when everything feels big and important and you're strategist, fundraiser, operations manager? Like, how do you balance all of these priorities?
Well, I mean, I think, it's kind of a few things. And, I'm going to preface this by saying that, I recognize that some nonprofits are, one person, right? So the next thing I'm going to say might not necessarily apply to those people, but, who you have around you and your team is one of the most important things, like the most critical things that count when it comes to prioritizing things, at least in my opinion, right? Who you have around you is a lot of value. And, when I go through times where everything feels important and I'm overwhelmed and I'm scattered and I'm, oh my God, I have to do 5 grant applications all at once. Sometimes, being there with your team and having your team help you reflect on what's important and asking them their opinion on what they think is important, really helps to kind of bring down a little bit of the chaos, for lack of a better word, about it. And sometimes the staff, will be like, well, you'll think something's important and the staff won't, and it'll wind up being a huge, great discussion, that you didn't really necessarily think about, right? So, but I mean, as always, I am a tremendous user of to-do lists. I have to-do lists for my to-do lists, and I spend a lot of time reflecting on that, right? Like I start out the week with the first half hour of my week is spent with my to-do list and creating one for the week and all the expectations and that sort of thing. And, because I really feel that for me, it's helpful. Again, I'm going to bring out the hats, but not necessarily the hats within the organization, but the difference between a leader and a manager. And I put on, when I'm dealing with prioritizing things, I put on my manager hat, because if I'm wearing my leader hat, I tend to be mission focused. And, I actually read a really good quote this morning that was, people with great passion can make the impossible happen. And I tend to fall into that category when I put on my leader hat. And that's when the pressure really falls on my shoulders. But if I take that hat off for a little while and I put on my task hat, my manager hat, task focused, it allows me to kind of focus on what needs to be done in what priority, in what order, and then as things come across my desk, I can review them and schedule them and, kind of go from there. But I operate in a little bit of a different mindset when dealing with prioritizing things. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And Sarah, such an important distinction for sure there. I love that, Karis. Swati, what would you add to this prioritization when everything feels urgent?
Yeah, I think Karis already laid it out perfectly, and I'm going to give a preface before answering that question. I'm a one-man army here, a one-woman army here in the US. So for me, the manager, the leader, the finance account, I mean, all hats are there on my desk as I walk in the morning. But having trained in the ER previously, I always have a triage mindset, that what is it that needs my attention immediately, so that everything that is calculated in my head is always, what is the long-term effect of it in terms of my donor relations? And then what is it that's going to affect my work immediately? So that's like my first half an hour of the morning that I usually come in with. And otherwise, I think for me, a lot of apps, like we are so fortunate to be in an era where we have so many things like Trello, Google Tasks, Google Calendar. I block off time on my calendar to kind of go through the list. Just having those things sorted out Another thing which has really worked for me is automating everything. I mean, chat gpt, having meeting assistants, and getting all of those things out of the way so that you have the mental bandwidth to actually wear those hats. Otherwise it's so easy to get pulled into the weeds and just drown in it. That, I think, for me, that has been a very big lifesaver. And I think the last two things that I'll say when I'm wearing these two hats is being adaptable. I've realized that I'll go in on my desk in the morning having an idea that I'm going to do this. And then the whole world is in a different direction. And you're like, oh my God, that did not go according to plan. So just being
That's why you check your to-do list all the time.
I know, always. It's always on the thing. But yeah, adaptability and keeping it simple. I think for me, that's been the most important thing as well. That how do I break it down so it's simple, it's not complicated, and I'm not overwhelming myself or anybody that I'm reaching out to just because I'm in that mindset. So I think for me, that has been always how I prioritize my day going forward.
I like that adaptability comment, Swati, a lot because I feel like every day I kind of make a loose plan and it never goes almost never. And it would be exciting one day if it did go the way I thought it was going to go, but that's okay. And that is part of being in that small shop mindset for sure. Anna, what's the framework? Do you have tools you use? How do you prioritize all those tasks? And also, how do you impart some of that knowledge to the, small startup nonprofits that you're working with?
Yeah. So years ago, one of my volunteers shared a tool with me that she called a wheel of business. And I think this is something that business students use, right? Like it has the different parts of your work on a wheel and asks you to kind of draw a line where you feel like you are in that section. So are you like just wonderful at it? Your line's going to be at the outside of the circle. Are you really struggling with it? Your line's way in towards the center of the circle. And then what you want is a wheel that will roll, right? And one that won't stop. And so my big thing is kind of like being honest with myself and understanding what are the areas where like I can just do it, it's automated, like I can handle it, and what are those where like I don't have the aptitude or the confidence or what have you, and build in those people so that I don't have to feel like I have to accomplish it all. I can, because the question that I ask myself is like, is this mission critical or is this a liability? And if it's not mission critical and it's not a liability, just take a deep breath and figure out how it's going to happen at some point, but like understanding myself, my capacities, like where I need to ask for help, that's the biggest part of it. And then when we started Greater Some, I was the only person on staff working with volunteers, but I came into nonprofit as a volunteer coordinator. And so like that's a big part of how we built our team is volunteers who say, that's my jam. Like call me with that question anytime. And that's kind of how we got to that when there was no staffing in those areas where I knew I needed to talk to somebody.
Volunteers and managing volunteers, that's a whole other LinkedIn live. So I'm not going to go down that path, but it is a really big conversation in the nonprofit world, right? That it is not discussed probably as much as it needs to be, even though a lot of nonprofits really use and rely on volunteers quite heavily for some of those skills. Okay, this is great. I love what we've started with. You guys have already given some great tips that I hadn't actually even heard of. I love the circle framework there. Anna, that was great. We're going to jump in and direct this one again at you first, Anna, but that time management piece, like what strategies have you adopted that seem to work when you have limited time and the task list, Karis's running task list is a million miles, in of things to do? How do you manage that?
Yep. Well, okay. So there are a couple things that I will probably say during this conversation that will age me. One of them is like I came up like in the 7 Habits training, right? Like I used to facilitate 7 Habits classes for people at my nonprofit. And in the 7 Habits, when we talk about prioritizing, we talk about big rocks and little rocks. And if you kind of fill your week with little rocks, you won't be able to put the big rocks in there. But if you start with the big rocks, you can pour all of those little rocks into the little, nooks and crannies between them. So I always ask myself, is this a big rock? What do I actually have to accomplish this week? And then I calendar those things and make sure that I don't end up, at 5 o'clock on a Friday going, but I didn't do this, and then in the moment.
What is that?
It's a timer. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I bought this after I missed a Hive chat.
Oh my goodness.
Knew what was happening. I knew it right up until moments before. And then I started writing one last email before I got on the chat and just blew right through it. So I set this thing like 10 times a day.
That's amazing. You're going to have to throw that link in the comments later, or we'll put it in the resources section after this chat is over, because I probably am going to need one of those for sure. That's amazing. I love that. Karis, what do you do with the limited time? Like, how do you stop from feeling behind the 8 ball in the time?
Well, I definitely don't know that a timer would work for me. I think it would stress me out even more, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm willing to try. So,
nice.
For the meantime, while I'm waiting, when I order my cube, I'm going to use my phone timer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know what? I mean, it's more of the same thing. And like, going back to like that, the whole big rocks and small rocks type of thing, right? Because if you're, you ask yourself, is this mission critical? Isn't everything critical? You get yourself so many times stuck in that everything is critical, right? And again, like, categorizing your tasks and what's big and what's little, making sure that you really break down your tasks so that you can actually check off your to-do list, the tasks that you're actually accomplishing. And that helps to kind of mentally shift you forward, right? Like if you're breaking your big rock down into a whole bunch of little small rocks, you're actually tracking, okay, like I did 10 things today that were within that, right? Like, and so you always feel like you're moving forward in that direction, taking a look at what tasks you have. I have a team of 3 full-time, well, there's myself and 2 others, a team of 3 full-time staff. And we all have different job titles, but we all wear many hats, right? So it's not like I'm an ED, but I do the accounting and I do HR, right? And my associate director does HR and does it volunteer, and right. So it's also taking a look at everything that needs to be done and looking at the strengths of your staff and saying like, hey, is there anything here that either I can work, with someone else on so that gets completed faster, or is it something that maybe, I'm only 50% good at, but that person is 75% good at, that maybe I can, it's worth, shifting. So I just find a lot of the times it's really important to reflect on the tasks that you're doing. And I also try, based on the time management piece, is I look at the task and I try to anticipate how much time it's going to take. And then I actually schedule it that way a little bit too, right? And because I'd be careful if, say I have this enormous grant to write and I know it's going to take me multiple days. Do I feel like writing that grant and that's the only thing I'm going to do over 3 days? Or do I feel like scheduling time every day to write that grant over 5 days and then scheduling other things in between, right? Like, it's again, reflecting on your schedule, reflecting on your to-do list. And, for me, it's also that that helps with my sense of control, right? Like,
yeah, I agree. I actually found recently, or discovered something about myself, which, I mean, Karis and I have talked a little bit about, I'm in my 40s and now I'm discovering who I am a little bit as a person. It's a weird and quirky time, but I actually think one of the things that's been really beneficial for me is discovering that I actually need external energy inputs. And for me, that, like, to be creative, if I don't get to talk to another person all day, I just nosedive. That's for me. And I know other people who are like, no, if I have a focused task, I can't talk to anybody. And I think for the longest time, I just kept trying to think to myself, I could do it like that, how that person did it, because look at how much they're accomplishing. But it was that square peg in a round hole. Like, I can't work that way. It does not work for my energy and how I move in the world. And that was a real eye opener for me, because I was convinced I was doing it all wrong. And it was my fault somehow that I couldn't do it, how everyone was talking. Time blocking. Some people love calendar blocking. I find it, like Kara said, with a timer, I find it intimidating to go, oh, but I don't want to do that today. Like, that is not a mission critical. And now I don't want to do that. Right. And so how do we find ways to work in our
sometimes I just don't do it. Right. We have to have some joy. I mean, that's the most important part, is finding joy in all of this, right? Like, we wear many hats and we're stressed and everything, but if there's a task that I particularly like doing, I might put off other tasks that are more, important or more critical to do, to work on that for a period of time, because it brings me joy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Swati, what would you add to this about limited time and, that challenge in small shop of limited time?
I think I need to say this, that Anna, your timer thing is going to be really helpful for me, because God knows I've missed flights. I'm sitting on the door and that Google Calendar like notification of 10 minutes before the meeting, and I'm like, yeah, I'll get to it, and then I forget about it. So definitely buying that timer. But I think a lot of these points that you're said that I also use, but I think for me, just to add to what has already been said, I think there's one aspect which I felt worked for me was saying no. Sometimes just saying no. It was just too much on your plate, and adding more to your stuff. I know as leaders, we have the responsibility of being there for the team, for everybody, for the donors, but there are times where you just have to say no. For example, I mean, the thing which really resonates with this is that, how we get on a flight, and we have that security thing where they say that put on your mask before you put on the mask for the other person. I mean, if we are drowning, we can't really help anybody else. So there are times where I feel that I have to take the step of saying no, and I have to be mindful, because it doesn't come easy of saying no. Another aspect of it is that taking that break of 15 minutes in the middle of Google Calendar, just blocking that time of resetting your mind, because again, I'm going back to an old saying that, you have to sharpen your axe to cut the tree. You can't keep cutting the tree with a blunt blade. So doing those couple of things, besides a lot of the points that you guys have already mentioned, has been very, very helpful for me. I think it's last point that I feel that has added to it, what Anna said initially, was sometimes just putting it down on paper and pen, because anytime I pick up my phone to be like, hey, this is the to-do list or something, and there are like so many emails, I'm like, oh, I forgot, I have to do this. So sometimes just going offline, putting it on paper and pen has also really helped me with my time management.
That's a really
I only use paper and pen for my to-do lists.
That is awesome. That is something I learned gradually, that I should do that.
I don't use anything digital for my to-do lists. Only paper and pen.
I love
Nice.
this.
With
This is
check marks. Check marks.
I think we kind of get caught up in the idea that we have to use technology sometimes
Yeah.
as well, right? Like, there's this like idea that, well, it's going to be more productive, and it can be, but it also can sometimes be a distraction to us as well. Okay, so I know some of you already started to fill this out who are listening in, and if you missed it earlier, we are running this fun Slido poll on the side, and some of you already started to fill it out. You're already onto it. I put the next question up. But what is the most challenging aspects of wearing multiple hats at your nonprofit? And some people already started jumping in, but that trying to meet expectations of various roles. And I do think, many of us, I would say I'm a generalist a lot of the time. I use that phrase because I've sometimes had to be a generalist, not because I chose to be a generalist, but I had to be. But I also think it's unrealistic to think that you're going to be an amazing, HR person and a marketer and probably a fundraiser and maybe operations all at the same time, right? So that really resonates with me as people started to fill this out, the stress from trying to meet expectations. Got a couple people, the high workload, difficulty in prioritizing tasks. So if anybody has, what do each of you find, if you had to choose out of these 5, what would be the most challenging of these? Anybody have a?
Is there an option of all of the above?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I know. I was trying not to make it too easy.
No,
I
no,
wanted people to pigeonhole themselves a little bit more if they could.
I actually talked to somebody at one point. I don't even remember where I heard this, but I know we talk about wearing multiple hats. And I always think about this when this is used, but I remember that someone was telling me that they actually got multiple hats, like physical hats. And they had this collection of hats, and they changed their hat every time, sitting at their desk every time that they changed what they were doing. Like, so they actually had a hat that represented their HR hat and put it on. Like, I just thought some people are so creative with ways of, really making this. I mean, this is not fun. It's interesting. It's what keeps me going to work every day. Being able to, you're not doing the same thing every day all the time. But how do we give ourselves a little bit of a break, right? Like there's all this pressure, but sometimes it's just how are we kind to ourselves? And I always laugh because could you imagine that, having a pile of hats at your desk and just physically wearing them? I thought that was great.
It would be a clear signal to the rest of your team when you switch from, the broad rimmed, I'm on vacation hat,
Yeah.
some sort of like trucker hat to like a bowler's hat. And this is what the hat is right now. So you can't talk to me about HR because I'm wearing
Right?
a marketing hat right now. So that is a fun idea for sure. We're going to move on to the next question here. And if people start having questions or they would like to, ask anything of our panelists, please jump in. I mean, the comment section is amazing over here, really enjoying what everyone has to say. But we're going to jump into something, and again, just lightly touch this topic because it's an enormous one. But we're going to direct this to Swati first, but the mental toll of wearing so many hats. Like, we can't pretend that it doesn't have, a mental toll. We talk about burnout in nonprofit quite a bit, and I think small teams often experience this in a different way than what's happening on larger teams. How do you care for yourself in a role like this, Swati? Or do you have resources or practices? How do you handle the workload?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right that as leaders, and especially of smaller nonprofits, the biggest thing is that we're not trying to disappoint, whether it's ourselves, our donors, our communities, especially that we are working for. So there are times that it just gets too much. But besides the part of having that mental strength of saying no, I think for me what has worked is that I usually have 15 minutes set aside, and I just take a break. I just go offline. I go offline for those 15 minutes. I'll go for a walk. My dog doubles as a therapy for me, so I'm going to do that. I have a friend, a colleague who literally has a yoga mat in her office, and she goes like full blast cardio. I mean, I look at her, I'm like, man, you're fit because you're doing it so many times. I can't do that. But it works, whatever works for you. Take those mental breaks, take those 10 minutes, 15 minutes breaks. That has really, really worked for me. And just at the beginning of the day, what over time I realized is I had a list, like a to-do list, Karis, as you mentioned, but I always made it a very intentional point of adding one or two small points, which I knew are going to be successes at the end of the day. Those are things that I could easily get to. So at the end of the day, I would feel that, okay, I at least accomplished these two things in the day. So for me, I think, and remembering that, perfection is not what I'm looking for, that comes very late in the process. I think it's progress.
What? We're not supposed
Yeah.
to be perfect. What?
Yes, I know. It was breaking news for me also, like after so many years. But it really helped me kind of give me grace to myself as well as to my team and everybody else, that we can't achieve perfection in day one. We'll have to keep working for it. So just be happy and just remember that it's the progress and moving the needle in the right direction. Just these kind of mental exercises and just going offline sometimes has really helped me, even if it's for 5 minutes.
Absolutely. I know Megan Whitney, I don't know if she's still on the call or not, but she's wonderful, talks about mindfulness in the nonprofit sector. And one of the conversations that I'd had with her, she really focused in on this idea of self-compassion. And, people in nonprofit are so compassionate to other humans, right? Like, if anything, that's what drives many of us into this sector. We care deeply, 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 but we're often not that great at reflecting it inwards and caring for ourselves as we care for others. And that, we talk about compassion, and even caring for your teams is a different thing, but that self-compassion piece, I think, is even more necessary when you are a team of one or a team of few. I think that really does make a difference. Anna, what would you add to this in terms of, I know you started as a team of one, now you have some more people coming onto your team. How do you handle, burnout prevention at work?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I think is a real asset to being a small shop like this is like, we're building the organizational culture from the ground up. Like, we're actually in charge of this. You know, sometimes I think as an ED, I feel driven. You know what I mean? I feel pulled by the mission. And this is one of those cases where I can say, no, we don't have to do it the way it was done as we were coming up in the field, you know? And so I kind of ask myself, what do I want our organizational culture to look like? So I lean on a nonprofit called Evolving Minds. I've been working with them for the last year or two, and they have a lot to do with kind of operationalizing the Surgeon General's recommendations around workplace wellness and mental health. So that's a great resource to go to for tools, and even down to like, make a commitment to make the first 10 or 15 minutes of your staff meeting be about connection. Like, that's a very small amount of time, and it's hugely meaningful, and it helps people on your team have a pathway to talk to you about things that are important to them outside of their job description, and just builds a lot of good habits. And then for myself, sometimes I ask myself, like, am I being a bad boss to myself? Because I get in this thing of being like, you weren't at your desk at 8 o'clock. You didn't get there until 9, you know? And I'm like, would I ever micromanage someone else this way? Would I ever hold any human being to the standards that I am just kind of internally applying to myself? And I've gotten much better at, just having that be a very quick conversation instead of oh, but I should. And yeah, so that's the big thing that helps me be there the way I want to be there for other people, is to start with how I'm treating myself.
I love that. That's fantastic. And it's so practical. Of course, we wouldn't treat someone else like this. I do this all the time, for sure, to myself. And I look at the list, and any other marketing job I've ever had, I would never expect anybody else to do all of it. But somehow I think to myself, oh, I would be able to do all of this. It's, false, for sure. Karis, what would you add to the, small team burnout? I know you and I have had conversations in the past too about, obviously, the pandemic coming in and how it overturned so many things for Evermore, and how you operated, and, big changes to your team structure and everything. How are you doing things with a team of 3?
Well, I mean, again, I think so much of this is like really looking within yourself and self-reflection. Like that's really been a theme, kind of, I think, of what we've talked about. And, very much how you said, you're finding yourself in your 40s and that type of thing, right? So, for myself, like, I used to try to, I always want to do it all, and type A perfectionist and all that kind of thing, and I think that there's this expectation in the sector of doing more with less, right? And I think that the sector itself is getting to a point where our organizations can no longer sustain doing more with less. So I really try to take that theme and internalize it and ask myself, like, I'm like, it's helping me to say no, but like, am I doing more with less, right? I mean, within reason, because obviously I have to do more because I wear many hats, but, so it kind of allows me to, give myself a little bit of kindness and a break and like, no, this, this isn't great. This isn't a right thing. But, with the chaos of the pandemic and everything, I mean, I said this when we met and we had our conversation, a little while ago. What we do is all about change. That's all we do every single day is change and change and change and change. And post-pandemic, I was super, super burnt out. At the time, like I had our associate director was off on leave, and I had to manage our team through the pandemic, and really didn't have kind of my second in command, I guess. And it was very difficult, and things were changing every day, and it was very stressful. I was so burnt out coming out of the pandemic. I just felt like I worked 15 years in 5 years or whatever, 3 years, right? And one of the things that I did for myself as a kindness is I realized how much we're changing all the time. And how much do I not only know how I don't react to change well, but maybe there's people on my team that also don't react to change well, or how they react to change. And I wound up actually taking certified change management training. And I learned in that training not only how I deal with change, but how to help our staff through change. And that has been one of the most like valuable trainings I could have ever taken, right? Is how to help our staff, and going back to the organizational culture piece. I mean, one of the most amazing things about it being a small organization is that, the culture is our decision, and our team sat down together and decided what kind of culture we want to have, and, reflected on that. And, the change piece helped to manage everybody through that culture. And, so we deal with change in a much more healthy way at this point as an organization, which really helps with burnout and, with, well, why do we have to do it that way? And why can't we do it this way? And no, now we have to do it this way. And right. And so, that's kind of trying to just manage that and recognizing that your team is going to look to you for what the standard is, right? And I don't ever want to be in a place where I've worked myself into 150%, and that's not something I would expect from our team, and that they then feel less than because they're not being able to reach that. I would never want a staff person to feel less than, or that they're not doing their job, or they're not, contributing as much as they need to be, because I'm doing way too much.
That's a really good reflection, I think, and not something we're always thinking about. This is great. If people have notes on how they're handling culture and great practices to help prevent burnout, please throw them in the comments. We're going to create a nice little document afterwards. So crowdsourcing some great ideas here. And this is our last question. So if you have anything you want to jump in on here in the comments, folks, please do so soon, because these lovely ladies have donated their lunch hour to be with us here on LinkedIn today. Karis, we're going to go back, and you kind of gave a great resource already here and lesson learned, but leading a small nonprofit, do you have a resource or a story or something that you would share with, our people listening in that you felt like made a real difference? Or actually it could be a cautionary tale too. Let's not limit it to only things that are positive, but if it's positive, great. But I think those lessons learned from others in the sector are the things that everyone's super excited to hear about.
I think that oftentimes as an executive director, you get wrapped up in all of the tasks and things you need to do to run an organization. And oftentimes when I feel the most stressed, I go and I run a program, and I go and spend time with the people that were there to help, right? And I take so much joy and energy from their stories, and hearing, like I said, I've been with the organization for going on 20, going to be 20, I'm starting my 25th year, and I'm starting to see kids and parents and grandparents, of children that are attending our program, have attended our program. And it's to see the difference we've made in entire families that we've had families of 8 kids come through our entire program and the relationships we develop with them. I mean, I've also said this, what we do is all about relationships, and it's really taking time to savor those meaningful relationships, whether it be with the people who are served by your organization, with your staff team, with your colleagues. I mean, let's plug the Hive chat. Right?
Yeah. No, but I think
So
it does make a difference, right? And actually there was, I'm not going to be able to find it. I'll have to find it afterwards and put it in the resources, but they were talking about how sometimes, even though people who are direct line front workers in programs and services, they experience a different kind of burnout. The workload is still enormous. They may have trauma exposure, but they also sometimes get the best of what happens when there's the successes and they can see the impact in real life. And that is something that in small nonprofits, not that you probably have the opportunity to see the impact in a different way than an enormous nonprofit. You might never get a chance to be right there in front of it, but taking the time to savor it and those experiences of impact might be something we're not all building into our time management piece. I love that. I love that. Swati, what would you say lessons learned in your time as ED at Help Age India?
I think for me, the biggest thing has been, learning not to reinvent the wheel when you can do things in a way that there's a reason why it has been done. But at the same time, also understanding as the ED what the balance is of challenging the status quo and why can't we change it? Why can't we question why it has been done this way, and being open and flexible to adapt to new things. I think that has been the biggest thing for me as a small nonprofit ED, having come from organizations which had, as you correctly said, like resources, and there were times where you could not even see on the ground what was happening because the programs were across the globe, etc. But just understanding and balancing it out, that has been a big lesson for me, that how do we make that thought process in our head that, okay, this has worked, why change it? We have 10,000 things on our plate already. But also realizing that, hey, we need to change it. This is not going to work. As we are building our organization, as we're building our culture, as we are moving to this community, which needs different things every day as well. So why can't we understand that? And I think, a plug for Nonprofit Hive, but I think just connecting with your peers, because they know, they will get it. That challenge that you are facing, you cannot go talk to anybody else except for fellow people who are going through it themselves. That question that you are getting is most probably being asked of other people as well. And sometimes it's not about just finding solution, it's about just getting that shoulder to cry on and say, hey, this is what happened, and you get that compassion from the other person who's gone through the same thing. I think for me that has been the biggest lesson, that you don't have to do it all. Karis correctly said, go back to the programs, understand why you're doing, because sometimes we just lose why we are doing what we are doing.
Yeah.
And just choosing your battles carefully. I think these are a couple of the lessons that I've learned as a small nonprofits ED.
I think those are great. And
that's what you need your change management training for.
I was going to say,
I'm going to come to you for that. That's definitely on my list now.
We might all need the change management training.
I was going to say, we're going to start working. Well, working.
My favorite saying is, why are we still doing this? Should we be continuing to do it this way? Or is there a different way, a better way, right? And that's why all you ever do is change, because you question the status quo.
That question is so
important. I had heard something somewhere that said, the most permanent thing is the change that is going on. So I think that's something that it took me a little while to understand and learn.
Absolutely. Anna, what would you add to this?
Well, I've been in this role. It'll be 8 years coming up soon. And I don't reflect often enough. It's not a habit that I have. And again, going to the role that volunteers play in my life as a leader, I was talking to one of my volunteers and I was just kind of like bemoaning the fact that earlier in my career, like I was the information queen, like I know where that is. I know how to get it. I know, like I was all spreadsheets all the time. Right. And now, like, if I'm going to do anything financial, I have to like get ready for it and have, like perfect circumstances and be careful and check it 3 times and so on and so forth. And I was telling her, like the pandemic, perimenopause, brain fog, like all these things are making me not good at things that I used to be good at. And she just asked me, but what are you better at? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know. That's not the way my internal monologue works. Yeah. But that's the thing is, like as you've been in this role, as you've grown in your career, as you've taken on different challenges, what are you better at? And when I built the practice of asking the question, the list got longer and it really changed me as a leader.
I love that. I love that. I'm horrible at reflecting myself. I actually, this year was the first year in a while, and I still didn't even reflect on myself. I just reflected on the nonprofit Hive as a business because self-reflection can be also exhausting. And then you have to maybe change things. And then I need Karis's course.
And you know what? I was just going to mention though, that with your self-reflection, I was in a training once, and the leader of the training said to go to like chapters, whatever, and buy yourself a really beautiful notebook that resonates with you and a special pen and whatever, and then sit down and make a list of every single thing that you've accomplished at the time of being the director of the organization. Like take the time to do that. And I'm like, okay, right? Because like, I mean, I haven't written a resume in a gajillion years. I have no idea what I can, I can do everything, right? But I sat down and I wrote out, like, it was pages and pages and pages and pages of things that I've accomplished. And I sat there going like, wow. And all of a sudden, like, I was just like, I am super proud of myself. Like, can we all just take a minute?
Yeah.
To reflect on how proud of ourselves, like how proud we should be for wearing many hats and doing what we're doing. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just...
No, it's great. It's great. It's great. Well, and this is why it was so exciting for this to be the first topic, to bring together you 3 people who I admire for the work that you're doing out in the world. And so many lovely people in the comments here jumping in on all the things you guys have said today. And, I'm really excited to see what the year ahead brings, not only for the Nonprofit Hive, but for the 3 of you and the work you're doing. And I do feel like there is more recognition happening about how challenging this work is. And there's also more thoughtful solutions and ideas. And you guys have given some amazing resources here. We're going to follow up with everyone afterwards about this, because I know we've already gone slightly over time for what I thought we might finish up with. But I knew that was going to happen. We're not totally out to lunch here. This was pretty good. And, Amina jumping on, if it was easy, everybody would be doing this, right? And there's some, I would like to say not everybody is able to work in these roles and these jobs. It takes someone with a lot of grit and the ability to get out there and learn and be creative. And you kind of do have to be a little bit of everything to everyone. And that's not easy to sustain. So thank you so much for bringing all of your wonderful thoughts to this conversation. The 3 of you have been rock stars, and I now have to go and try to pull all of this together to send out to people and go, here's all the brilliant things that they said in the conversation. So thank you. Thank you to everybody who joined. There's a whole bunch of people dropping thank yous in the comments. And what a way to start off the new year. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.